All right, everyone, it's time to talk about the upcoming French elections, of course, sort of neck and neck between Le Pen and Macron. There is good news and better news and also a little bit of kind of sort of meh news. The meh news is that Le Pen and Macron remain locked in a stalemate. It's kind of difficult now because they sort of stalled out for weeks at the same general mode, well within the statistical margin of error within all of these polls. It's actually not possible to tell whether Le Pen is even going to come in first on the first ballot. I think she will. My prediction is there's at least an 80% chance she wins on the first ballot. But winning on the first ballot with less than 50%, of course, means it goes to a second ballot where it's between her and Macron. There's where it gets fuzzy. The fuzzy part is that when only those two are considered, we would expect most of Fillon's supporters probably to back Le Pen. I think that there's an underestimation of how well she'll do there. Some people are like, oh, she'll get like a third of the votes. He'll be way, way out in front. I don't think that. I think she at least cracks 40%, which is a lot closer. And it's a significant boost for Front National, and here's why. The last time around, they didn't make it to the second ballot. I think they didn't even crack 20%. Now it looks like she's up at least 25 to 30 on the first ballot, probably absorbs support on the second. Clearly, it becomes the second largest sort of party movement within France, and that's sort of the lower expectation. The most optimistic situation is that because of turnout, she actually does better than expected. Macron does more poorly than expected, and she ekes out a win on the second ballot. That's the best case scenario. It's not the most likely scenario, but there is the possibility. We would have to, again, though, it'd be like the American election. I would have to look at the polls and judge that there was a systemic bias and or systemic underrepresentation of her support and maybe support for Fillon as well, maybe based on scandal or whatever, and that the most optimistic possible switching of those votes from other candidates goes to Le Pen on the second ballot in order to see a scenario in which she actually wins, in which she becomes the next leader of France. I don't calculate that as likely, less than a 10% chance. I think the most plausible scenario is that she's slightly higher than what she's polling at on the first ballot, is a few points ahead of Macron. On the second ballot, I expect her to absorb some degree of support from the centrists in France and to have a significantly higher total amount on the second ballot. I do not believe that she will win the election, but it's not certain. It's more difficult to judge what's going to happen here as opposed with the American election. With our election, it was fairly clear that most of the polls showing Clinton ahead in places like Pennsylvania. I called that for Trump before the election. Michigan was more up in the air, and I didn't see Wisconsin coming. But for some of these states, like Florida, I said Trump was likely to win it, North Carolina, and he ended up doing so. That's how he won. With Le Pen and the French election system being as it is, it's a more crowded field of individuals. 3 other people have double-digit or nearly double-digit support. A couple of them are on the left. One is far left, further left than Macron. Those votes go to him, probably. That gets him to around 40. Most of the center-left votes probably go to him, too. That should get him above 50%, if only slightly. And then you've got some of these smaller marginal candidates. It's hard to tell what will happen there. The real kicker is, though, if some of those center-leftists vote for Le Pen on the second ballot because they don't like Macron for one reason or another, she could still feasibly win. There's a possibility, there's a path to victory. And what I stated before is that they've already basically won. Le Pen has won on multiple counts already before the election even takes place in France. Front National has certainly won in terms of growth, going from a minor party doesn't make second ballot, sub 20% support, a legit party, a large-ish party movement, but doesn't make it to the second ballot last time around, to a party that will almost certainly be one of the 2 main parties, whether it wins or not. That's win number 1. Win number 2 is that the French media, and indeed the media here and elsewhere, now has to discuss possibilities of Le Pen winning after before calling her fringe, calling Front National fringe, they're far right, they're evil, There's no possibility they ever lead France. There's no possibility they even become like one of the main parties. It looks like that time has now passed. They can no longer ignore the growth of the movement. Now they can simply smear it and sit back and cross their fingers and hope that she doesn't actually eke out some sort of win. And if she wins, which again I still consider less likely than that she simply comes in a strong second. If she does manage to win, it'll be a combination of higher turnout for her, lower turnout for her opponent, a lot of people switching their affiliation because they don't like Macron. That they see that the Hollande-era policies aren't working. They may not like Front National, but they see it as an alternative to what they're currently dealing with, and or possibly the rise of further right movements, as opposed to Front National that's, all things considered, it's not really that far to the right. It's really more of a center-right movement. They're talking about, yeah, we don't want limitless immigration, and we want to rescind some of the sort of Hollande fiscal policies. That's not particularly far right. That's not even really, it's kind of populism. It's a little bit of nativism thrown in there, but it's not like some of these other people that are talking about, oh, total French nationalism, we're going to rebuild like the Napoleonic days or something like that. Le Pen gets compared to Napoleon all the time. I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing the imperialism. I'm simply seeing a people that want to reassert their sovereignty, that want to control their borders, control their economy, kind of tired of the EU thing. And Le Pen hasn't even called out for leaving the EU. She's simply saying we want more favorable stuff to go on within the EU. Here's the secret, though. This is one thing the French people need to understand, and see with the UK and so forth. When Le Pen says, oh, I'm not necessarily calling for a referendum on being in or out of the EU, I simply want to reform the way we interact with it, that would be preferable, that's code for we will leave the EU. And the reason why is the EU is too strong. This is what all the populists and nationalists across Europe understand. The EU is simply too strangulated to actually conduct that sort of diplomacy with any of its member states. It's impossible. It drags on for years. We see speech after speech. Nigel Farage shows up in the EU's assembly there. And he says the same things. They always laugh at him. They always ignore him for years and years. You can see him visibly aging over the course of this very long span of time. Nothing ever gets accomplished until it comes to a head and they actually start talking about a Brexit vote. And until the very twilight of that period before the vote, nobody even takes it seriously. There's no serious attempt by the EU to address the grievances of its member states, unless that member state is Germany or Belgium talking about how they want more immigration, something like that. But when we look back, we look and we see the Brexit was all but denied in feasibility, and then it happened. The people there, within the UK and without the UK, all came out very strongly and said it'll never happen. And then towards the end they say, well, we're cautiously optimistic it won't happen based on polling. Turned out they were wrong. Brexit happened. It's been Article 50 has been triggered. Theresa May did so. The Queen's consent, all that sort of, random British stuff, trappings of last century. And so it's happening. It'll take a while, but the negotiations have already begun. They look to the Netherlands. And they act as though Wilders' party, the actual nationalists of his nation, simply gaining a significant amount of representation and doing far better than they did last time around is somehow a victory for the EU. That's their idea of optimism at this point. Their optimism is that populism and nationalism slow down in their growth. Meanwhile, they're sitting there gritting their teeth and sweating because Le Pen actually looks like she might have the possibility of pulling it off. And if there's any significant poll movement in her favor, yeah, she could win it. I just don't think that that's quite as likely, but it's going to be a statement on the EU anyway. They're talking about now, oh, if she wins, the EU is basically dead. We're doomed. Well, yeah, I would agree with that. If France were to decide to elect a populist, then you would definitely get a Frexit. There wouldn't be any sort of they refuse to negotiate with any of the member states anyway, so it's not like their grievances will be addressed. They won't address the economic side of the problems of the EU. They won't address the side of Merkel trying to create an EU army or any of these things. It'll never happen. They certainly won't address the immigration issue because Merkel lords it over everybody else in the EU. So there would be a Frexit, or at least the attempt to have one. They would hold a referendum. It might fail the first time around. People would immediately clamor for another one. It'd probably win down the road when the situation gets worse. And every time there's an attack in any of these European states, two things happen. The far right so-called rises, and the far left so-called rises. And the centrists decline. It's already happened in France. Who are the two major candidates? Somebody who's basically a socialist versus somebody who's populist light. Both, they're not exactly complete centrist ideologies. I see Le Pen is closer to an actual sane center myself, but by European standards, it's not really true. It's still, to them, it's still far right. And yet she's at least going to be in second place. It's hilarious. And she's certainly young enough to launch another campaign, too. That's probably what really has them worried. Their most optimistic scenario is that Le Pen narrowly loses here and comes around again the next time and wins. So that they stay, for a few years, they stave off the leaving of France from the European Union. That's their most optimistic scenario. The same, I would say, it's true in the UK. What, has their labor movement really gained dominance again, or is it still completely collapsed? A bunch of nationalists control Scotland. A bunch of conservatives and other sort of groups control everything else. That's the state of Europe today. And other countries are joining a board now. Swedish Democrats, they rise up. Denmark, their populist movement, sort of populist light again, like France, is certainly gaining more dominance. The Visegrad group is constantly talking about the immigration crisis. That's the state of Europe. It's looking more like it did in the 1930s than it did in the 1990s. There's dissension everywhere because the EU has become so strangulating. So, when I look at the polls, I would have to calculate a significant and totally pervasive error in their polling methodology to predict that Le Pen would win. That being said, she will at least come in second place. She's going to do well enough to really get the people at the EU very nervous. That is probably the real operative scenario that we're looking at. With more effort, if Le Pen's fans, this is a message to all of those who back her or Fillon or whoever, if you want to rip France out of the EU, if you want the French people to take up the banner that's sort of been, handed to them on a golden platter by Nigel Farage in the UK, if you want to be buddies with the UK and the US, the power centers of the Western world, instead of sort of being, allied with Merkel, who rules over a substandard regime, which nonetheless remains wildly popular in Germany. I don't understand why, because the average German certainly isn't benefiting from what's going on there. If you want to be a leader instead of just a power within the European Union, and you support this concept, you need to vote for Le Pen. Fillon is not viable. He can't win. It's impossible. If you're going to vote for him on the first ballot anyway, you need to switch your support to Le Pen as your second choice to buffer her support. Her polling numbers plus his get very, very close to the 50% mark right there. We're talking about 25 for Le Pen and maybe 20-ish for Fillon, or a little less, 18, 19%. That gets her to the mid-40s right there. Any significant movement of the center-left towards her to punish the establishment of France and French politics would give her the election. At the very least, it'd be so close. What kind of mandate would he have? Has to win on second ballot against extremely viable upstart opponent who can easily unseat him the next time around. Is going to look weak. And the EU will spend. Watch what the EU does. Regardless, whether she loses or wins, either way it'd be close. Regardless, the EU will try to punish the French people. Merkel will try to punish the French people. It's been their strategy for a decade now. They keep doing the same thing over and over. Now, it doesn't work. It just causes the left and the right to collectively grow and suppresses centrist movements. I would think they'd want to pull back on the abuse. If they want the center to grow again, be seen as viable, and head off sort of the far left, far right stuff, then what they need to do is stop abusing their member states. But again, they can't really do that. They've already wrapped so many layers of abuse around all of these countries that are in the EU, or they're tied to the euro in some way, or they just trade with the EU, that it's basically impossible. They get outmaneuvered by even the smallest parties. That's their problem. It's what happened here, more or less. Abuse seen among neocons and neoliberals caused those two movements to lose favor. So you had an outright socialist, very far left by American standards, in Bernie Sanders, actually being viable within the Democratic Party. Something that wouldn't have happened 4 years ago. And then on the right, you have the successful usurpation of a large party by a person who isn't a conservative. And Trump's not. By the way, he's not a conservative. He's a populist. He has centrist fiscal views. He has centrist social views. He's simply making an America First sort of platform. A lot of people, because they're not used to this, they see that as like racist or bigoted or something. That would have been considered normal pre-Reagan. That would have been considered normal for a Democrat or a Republican pre-Reagan. Or pre-Nixon, certainly. Pre-Southern strategy, the redrawing of the electoral map. What he's saying would have been considered common sense. Nobody would have called him a bigot. Hell, they probably would have called him a progressive back in the 1970s. People, I think, don't understand that. They haven't studied enough political history. Le Pen, right now, is cast off as far right. But she's not. What specifically has she proposed that fits in with the Nazis or something like that? Like outright, Sieg Heil National. Nothing. Oh, well, we kind of want to control our borders. We don't want a bunch of criminals in our country. And we want to determine our own sort of fiscal and foreign policy. So what's so wrong about that? So it'll make you like the United States. They'll make France more powerful. The golden age of France hasn't even arrived yet if you elect populism into power there. We're not even talking about significant levels of reform. We're talking about a fairly mild reform movement in the form of Front National that can actually get the job done without being abusive. But if you keep trying to suppress these movements, you're going to get an even further right and an even further left. You will end up with a Weimar situation. European politicians don't seem to understand this. They've done this over and over. When the center starts falling out of favor, they always try to suppress these upstarts. The first wave of upstarts aren't even abusive. We're talking like pre-Nazi party right or pre-communist left in like early Weimar days or something. And these groups are they're actively suppressed to the point at which it becomes cool for the youth to be a member of one of these movements, until all of a sudden you have the Red Front marching through the streets in one side of the city, and then a bunch of jackbooted National Socialists marching on the other side, clashing constantly. The police can't do anything. The military, held back as it is, like the EU today, they can't do anything. The politicians are toothless, and soon the riots begin. That's what they're looking forward to in Europe, if they continue. Maybe that's Merkel's plan. Maybe she wants to install herself as dictator of some at first far-left Reich that nonetheless, very quickly, they drop the hammer and sickle in favor once again of the swastika. Well, it's probably something France doesn't want to be a part of, because last time I checked, you had some diplomatic squabbles from time to time with people like Angela Merkel. I know people say it's Angela Merkel. Well, I'm not German, so we say Angela. She's Angela Merkel to me, and I don't really care what she or any other supporter of her actually thinks. That's about all. Peace out.